Hi, everyone. Dr. Tim and Hilary here for another session of Dr. Tim's Aquatics podcast. How you doing this morning, Hilary?
I am doing good. How are you?
Busy. Show season is officially starting. Where we got a Aquashella, I think this weekend, the Aquaculture Conference, Reefapalooza's coming up. Before that, out in Denver, Reef Stock, and then the global show. And then the end of March, I am speaking at RasTech. What's RasTech, you ask?
I was going to.
All right, Recirculating Aquaculture Systems conference that I've been invited to speak at in Hilton Head, South Carolina, 2-day conference.
Oh, that sounds awful. Just awful.
Well, I'm just flying in, doing the talk, and flying out.
So come on.
No, don't have to. Busy. That's just the end till the end of March. So then we've got lots of stuff happening in April too. So it's all good.
Yep. And if you've been following our social media, you're hopefully as excited as I am, because we started posting our bacteria jokes on Mondays. If you haven't seen those, please go back and watch. They are hilarious. I absolutely love them. We've had a really good response on them too.
Yeah, probably because everybody's looking at me like, what a fool. But I don't think they're laughing at the jokes. But that's okay. I made up one, as I told you the other day. It was funny and scientific at the same time. How's that?
See,
in the same sentence.
Mm-hmm. And that's why people come to our page. They like this.
Yes. So it's a thinking joke. Yeah, I think I won't listen again, maybe. Anyways, so today we are going to talk about acclimation.
Yes. I'm excited. Because some of you guys requested this on YouTube, that we index the podcast videos. So I'm working on indexing those videos. It's a slow process, but I did our very last episode, our main topic, and we talked about, we should have a podcast on acclimation. So of course, here we are talking about acclimation, and it's really interesting. People talk about like, is my phone listening to me when I talk about things? Because I swear I've seen so many different articles and Instagram posts and people talking about, this is how I acclimate my fish, or this is how I acclimate my coral. So hopefully this is a very timely podcast.
Yes, and not too controversial, but we can't promise that, can we? Because I have very particular opinions on how to acclimate. And for you that may not know, I used to run a really large fish hatchery. We grew the fish in San Diego, would bag them up, and then drive them out to the fish farm in out south of Indio, California. So it was a long drive, lots of fish and small, fingerling fish in the bags. So I have a lot of experience with acclimating fish and then shipping. We used to ship fish all over the world, live fish, and get fish in. So I have a lot of experience with shipping and receiving fish that have been in the bags or changing from one environment to another, which is basically what acclimation is. Let's define that. So you've got a coral or a fish, and you're moving it from one environment to a next. So the water quality is going to be different in terms of temperature, salinity, everything's just a different environment. And how do you do that so you don't shock the animal and maximize its chance for survival?
Exactly.
Want to add anything to that definition, Hilary?
No, I think that's a pretty good definition. I think you covered everything, and it's something that's important for every fish keeper, be you a freshwater fish keeper, a saltwater, or if you just have reef tanks. Like, this is something that's important for everybody across, because nobody wants to spend all of that money buying fish or coral and then having them die because they weren't properly acclimated.
Yeah. And so what you have to be aware of is how big that change is. Is there going to be a big change in temperature, a big change in pH, a big change in salinity between, you might think the environment they were in and the environment they're coming to, but in reality, when you put fish in a bag or coral in a bag, the bag environment changes over time. So once the bag reaches your location, the water in that bag, in many respects, may not be at all the same as the water when it left. And I'll explain that. In the bag, let's take fish. That's the most critical one, maybe, is obviously temperature. If you're shipping the fish from one location to another, like right now in the Midwest, there's really bad storms going on. Planes are delayed, boxes are sitting. Even if they're shipped in styrofoam with heat packs, there can be a big temperature difference between the water when it arrives, and when it left. And so it's going to be much colder. Or in the summertime, if a plane sits out, cargo sits out in the runway in the middle of the desert, and yes, that can happen, the bags may really heat up. So the temperature could be a lot warmer in the bag than what was the temperature in the environment they left, and what's the temperature of the environment that they're coming to. So temperature is a big one. And temperature actually, I think, is an easy one. You can just float the bag, and let the water temperature, come together between the bag and the tank, and acclimate that way. Also, most fish can handle temperature changes pretty well, unless the water is just super hot or super cold. And in that case, you have to make a decision. Is it just better to get the animal out of the bag because the water in the bag is just too cold or just too warm, and the animal needs to be removed immediately?
Now, I've got a question. I've always heard that it's better for them to go, say, too cold than too warm. That, when the water warms up, it causes more damage than it would if it were going colder. Is that true?
Generally, yes, because one thing, the warm water, less oxygen. So as the bag heats up, there's less oxygen available to the fish. Secondly, as the bag water gets hotter, microbial processes are going to increase because bacteria basically grow faster in warmer environments. So the bacteria can be also consuming oxygen out of the bag. So it's definitely better for the fish to have colder water. And even saltwater fish and marine fish can tolerate cold water to a pretty good degree. Now, we're not talking ice cold, but it's definitely better for the fish because it slows everyone's metabolism. The fish, the bacteria, just slows everything down, increases the oxygen. It slows the oxygen consumption, so it's definitely better when the fish is in colder water rather than in warmer water. Now, the other thing that happens, depending on where you're getting your fish from, hopefully they've been off feed for a couple of days, because if they're excreting into the bag water, the waste is going to be broken down by bacteria. And that bacteria is converting that waste into ammonia and also consuming oxygen at the same time. So good shippers will make sure the fish are off feed for at least 24 to 48 hours before they're shipped. Or in cases of coral, they're maybe not being fed, but there's a minimal amount of algae or other extraneous organisms in the water. And of course, they're using good, clean water, meaning free of organics, because all that organic material is subject to bacterial degradation, breaking down by bacteria, which consumes oxygen and produces ammonia. And sometimes animals are shipped just wet. We used to ship lobsters. They didn't need to be in water. They just needed to be kept damp. And that makes it a lot easier. You have to protect against temperatures, but lobsters can go down to super cold temperatures. So they're pretty hardy to ship, unlike fish.
I think several of the times when I worked at local fish stores, we would get sometimes snails and hermit crabs would come in and just like damp newspaper with little to no water in there. It's always interesting. Oh, they don't need water. Cool.
Right. And if you're thinking of shipping fish, there's a whole nother talk, but less water is better because you really need oxygen. As long as the fish is covered so that it's not exposed, its gills are not exposed, you actually want more oxygen, and that's why we ship with pure oxygen. You fill the bag up maybe a quarter with water, add the animal, collapse the bag to get all the air out, and then fill the bag with pure oxygen and seal it with a rubber band or a clamp, and then ship it like that. That's a pretty common way to ship, definitely with more oxygen in the bag than water. But we're talking about acclimation. So you get your fish in. The typical way you'll see is there's a couple of different ways. Some people will float the bags, and if the just to acclimate with this is acclimating temperature. So it's the temperature of the bag is much different than the temperature of the receiving water. You put the bags in the tank, the vessel, whatever the receiving water is, and let them sit for a while. And that's fine unless the fish, if you look at a bag and the water is super cloudy, there's signs of stressed fish or dead fish. In my opinion, floating the bag is not going to help with those fish. Those fish need to get in fresh water as soon as possible. And
when you say fresh water, you mean clean water, not necessarily
clean water. Yeah. And one cardinal rule: never put bag water in whatever you're putting your fish in. So don't in your aquarium, in your receiving vessel, in your tank, whatever. Basically, you should have a bucket with a little water in it, a net in that bucket. Open your bag and gently pour the fish through the bucket, the fish and the nasty water through the net into that bucket. And then take the net, which has got all the fish in it or the fish in it, and put that in the clean water. Don't slice the bag open and let the bag and all that nasty water go into your aquarium. That's just a recipe for potential disaster.
Yes. And to that point, I don't get new stuff that often, but when I do, if my bags need to be floated, I will usually put them in like a separate container or something and float like the separate container with the bag in it, so that I don't even, because especially like from local fish stores and stuff, if you get them, the bags might be sitting down in water. You don't know what's in the water or where the water's been. So I'm always overly cautious on stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. So the first thing to do when you get your bag in is assess what's the condition. Do I need I mean, are the fish or is the animal stressed? Obviously, if it's on its side, or another way to tell, like I said, is the water is super, super cloudy, milky. That's pretty good sign. And you need to get the animal out of that nasty water immediately. Don't, I mean, this is my opinion, but it's backed by a lot of experience. Don't worry about temperature differences, pH difference, all that stuff. Get the animal in fresh, I'll use clean, in clean water immediately. Now, another common way, say the bag looks good, the fish look good, everything's, fine, is to do what's called a drip acclimation. And this is where you open the bag and you have like an airline or something, and you start a small siphon from the vessel the fish are going into, and you're drawing water from that into and dripping it into the bag the fish arrived in, to slowly change the water in the bag to being more like the water in the aquarium. I don't like this method. And
basically, I'm listening to you. I was like, you basically just described what I would consider is acclimations. Like you're slowly dripping and making the water the same. And maybe that's why so many people use this method, because it's the first they think of.
I don't know. I mean, it's what you see. Maybe you go into a store and you see it, and it maybe makes sense. I'm going to I'm going to slowly change over time the water in the bag from what it was to what it's going to be. What the fish is in to what the fish is going to be in, and on the surface that makes sense. But as I will explain, I think it does more harm than good, especially if the fish has been in that bag for any considerable amount of time, which to me is over over a few hours. So here's what's going on in the bag.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Anytime.
So when people are buying fish, say they get fish at their local fish store, and say that the fish had just come in that morning or something, how long on average do you think are these fish traveling in the bags? I guess it depends on where you are in the country, whether or not it's sat on like a 2-hour plane ride or, a 12-hour plane ride. But like when you think of fish and, animals in bags traveling, on average, how long?
In the bag, probably less, I would say in the majority cases, between 12 and less than 24 hours. I mean, the fish farms in Florida, bag and then get right to the airport that same day, and then it's shipped out overnight and arrives in the fish store, or it's bagged in the day, shipped overnight, arrives at the airport in the morning, and then is shipped out or picked up. So I would say that the vast majority of fish are in those bags less than 24 hours.
Wow, that's surprising. I don't know why I anticipated or expected them to have been in there for a month.
You're fading in and out for some reason. You expected them in and out longer? Or
yeah, I expected them to be in those bags for much longer than that. I don't know why.
Yeah, no, and I know some operations, especially in saltwater, that get their fish overseas. They actually make a stop in LA where there's a couple of big transshippers, and they do a water change. They grab those fish in those bags from the planes, take them, and do a big water change. All new water, and rebag the fish and then ship them out. So they're not in the same water or the same bag that they were originally shipped from, from Asia or from the Philippines. It just depends on the shipper, now with, during COVID, especially with fewer and fewer airlines flying, it was hard to get some fish just because there wasn't the cargo traffic between the countries.
Yeah,
But
I guess that makes sense. It's interesting. I've always found that fascinating, because I feel like the travel and shipping fish, and I feel like that's something as hobbyists we don't know a lot about. We only see the end point of all of that.
yeah, there's been a lot of articles. Well, I don't know about a lot, but I think if you went and searched, you'd see out there. But it's a thing that maybe some of these companies maybe need to make more transparent about how they do ship and care, because some of these companies take amazing amount of care and expense. And you think, why is this fish so expensive? But it's gone through a couple water changes and changed hands, just to get it in good shape, continually good shape when it arrives at the store. And then some stores even quarantine their fish for a while before they get to you. Fish are tough, and done right, they can be shipped, all over the world and arrive safely. So,
That's pretty
but
cool.
In most cases, if you're getting a fish, if you're getting a fish from your local fish store, and you go down there, you pick your fish, you bag it, you should take it right home, for one thing. I mean, you shouldn't then go to the, another store, grocery shopping, wandering around. The fish is in the bag. It's not getting any better in the bag. Get it home and get it out of the bag. And in many cases, I know people aren't going to let me hear this, but just pour the fish through the net and get it in the net and put it in the tank. I don't really know that you need a lot of acclimation unless there's something really different about your tank. And here is a scenario I've heard several times: is people, they're not really in the market for a fish. They're not purposely going there to the fish store, but they wander into the store. They're with their kids or something, and they see a fish, and let's get a fish. So they buy a fish and they take it home and they put it in their aquarium, and the next day it's dead, a few hours or something. What's happened. Now this is what can happen in this situation, is that if you haven't been maintaining your aquarium, the pH and the water chemistry of your aquarium can be much different than that of a fish store, because usually fish stores are going through a lot of water. They're taking the water out to bag the fish, so they're putting in new water into their systems. You, on the other hand, maybe you're not keeping up on your maintenance, and especially with saltwater fish, but it can happen with freshwater. The water quality in the tank can become much different. I had one case where this one person couldn't keep new fish alive, and it turned out their salinity was just really high. Generally, it's going to be that your pH is going to be really low, because, as we've talked about in many podcasts, nitrification's adding an acid. It's causing the alkalinity to be consumed, which then causes the pH to drop. So the natural tendency of all aquariums is for the pH to lower or to go down. But the pH in a fish store, especially, in this area, California, even Vegas, where we have hard, high alkalinity water, our pH is high. And so your pH in your aquarium, the fish that are in there have slowly gotten used to that dropping of the pH. This is especially true in freshwater systems. It's the pH has changed over time. The fish have gotten used to that slow change. But now you take a fish and put it in from a high pH environment and put it right into that aquarium immediately, even with a little bit of, acclimation, drip acclimation, if that's what you want to do. And the fish just doesn't change, can't tolerate that big change. So the moral of that story is, unless you know your water quality is good and you've been keeping up on your maintenance, buying a fish at the spur of the moment is probably not the best idea.
I would never recommend impulse buying fish. Please always do your research before you buy anything and make sure you're prepared to bring it home,
Yeah.
including maintenance on your tanks and,
Right. And that's
compatibility
why
and all
it's
that
always
jazz.
good to, get to know your local fish store. They're a resource, and what kind of fish, freshwater fish are amazingly versatile. You don't have to keep a discus that comes from soft, low pH water in a soft, low pH tank. They do fine in Southern California water. Maybe if you want to spawn them, but most people aren't into, spawning their fish. They just want a nice fish aquarium. What they don't like is the big giant changes. And that's why you want to be doing your maintenance. And before you add fish, you make sure you've done water changes, clean the filter, and keep up on that so that the pH and the alkalinity are in good shape. And you're not exposing a fish from an aquarium in a store to a much, much different water quality environment of your aquarium that you haven't been maintaining. And there's another subtle hint there: maintain your aquarium.
and I'm going to say, shameless plug, First Defense is something else good that you could keep on hand to add to your tank when you're adding fish.
Yeah. But it's more and more common that people are buying fish from different locations and having them shipped in. So the fish has been in the bag for several hours. So let's go back to what we originally talked about in terms of the drip acclimation. So what's happened in the bag? So here's why in 99% of the cases, I do not like what's commonly called the drip acclimation, which is where you open the bag and slowly drip water from your aquarium into the bag of water with the fish in it that the fish just arrived in. So the fish has been in this bag, it's respiring, which means it's putting in CO2. CO2 in the water is now causing the pH of that water to drop. The fish is also, even if it hasn't been fed for 24 hours, it's still excreting ammonia into the bag. There's no biofiltration in the bag, so the ammonia is building up. But because of the CO2, the pH in the bag is dropping. And you can test this. You can take a sample when you open the bag, and you're going to find that the pH is low. And you can take an ammonia test, and in many cases, you're going to find the pH is high. I'm sorry, the ammonia is high. So the pH is low, the ammonia is high, and the fish is fine. And that is because, as you've been listening to these podcasts, you know now that the majority or all the total ammonia in that bag water is in the ammonium, the NH4 plus form, which is the non-toxic form. And the fish is doing fine. It's in that non-toxic form because the pH is low, 6 or lower. Now, what do? You take your beautiful, clean water and start dropping it into that tank, into the bag, and you've opened the bag, which is letting the CO2 out. Some people even put an air stone in the bag, thinking that's going to help bubble, and it will help a little bit bubble up the CO2. But you're dripping in that great new water. What's going to happen? The pH is going to rise. And if you're in Southern California, that pH is quickly going to rise to 8 or 8.2, which is the typical water we have here. As that pH rises, all that ammonium starts to switch. Not all, not 100%, but a great majority of that ammonium starts to switch to ammonia, 5%, 10%, depending on the pH. That's the toxic form. And if you've got total ammonia off the scale, and now you're increasing the pH so that even 5 or 10% of the total ammonia is in the ammonia form, the NH3, the toxic form, it can be so high in the bag that the fish immediately start to become stressed. And this is why I don't really like drip acclimation, because your fish was doing fine in that low pH, high ammonium environment. It's not going to do well in the high pH, now ammonia present environment. And assuming the temperatures were within, I mean, really, it's pretty hardy. Fish are pretty hardy, 10 degrees or so, and you can do that by floating the bag for a little bit. My contention is it is always better to get the fish out of that high or low pH, high ammonium, high CO2 environment into new water. Because as we've talked about, if the, once you start drip acclimating and increasing the pH, the ammonium shifting to the wrong form, and it can definitely poison your fish in just the short few hours that you have the fish in the bag. I've seen it because the total ammonia can be super, super high in these bags. That's my short, basically definition. We would never keep fry. So, the smaller the fish, the more sensitive it is to ammonia poisoning. I mean, you can look at ammonia toxicity studies. If you remember, I've done this for my master's, and the ammonia toxicity, the LC50 for 24 hours, that's the concentration that kills 50% of the fish in 24 hours. So you can do it for 8 hours. It generally, smaller fish, a lower amount of ammonia will harm them than if they were bigger. So the bigger the fish, the more ammonia they can tolerate. So small fish, which is generally what people are buying, don't tolerate the ammonia as well as bigger fish. So get them out of the bag. Now, I don't know if that's what you were taught, Hilary. We don't talk about these things beforehand, folks. So
no, we don't. And it's crazy. I've worked at a public aquarium, and I've worked at 2 different local fish stores, different sides of the country. And it's wild. Like, everybody had their own set way of how they wanted you to acclimate fish. And it's funny, like, they would talk to people, like the owners of the store would talk to people, and they're like, well, I talked to so-and-so, and now we need to acclimate this way, or we need to do this, 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 and this. But it was interesting. Like, I don't think anybody ever really talked about the science behind why you should acclimate one way or the other. But here we have.
Right. I mean, I'd like to give people reasons. If you look at what's happening, well, CO2 buildup, that's not good. And we know it's building up in the tank or in the bag. And also ammonia, we know you can just measure this. You can take your test kit, measure, and the ammonium is going to be off the scale. It may be so high you have to dilute. Well, now you start changing the water. We know what's going to happen. You're not generally putting low pH water in that tank. You're acclimating with higher pH. The higher the pH shifts, which means that more of that total ammonia is going into the NH3 form that's going to harm the fish. Temperature. A lot of people want to talk about temperature, but if your fish has come in and it's really cold, that's not doing the fish any good to be, really cold. Now, let's talk about that. Depending on the fish, what would be a change where you would float the bag? And it really does depend upon the fish. I would say any temperature change greater than 10 degrees Fahrenheit in either direction. So your tank is set for 75. If your fish come in at 60 degrees or less, you probably want to acclimate. They come in at, 85, 90 degrees. You may want to just float the bag. Don't open the bag. Okay. Because once you open the bag, the CO2 is going to off gas and then the pH is going to increase, and then you start affecting the ammonia ratio. So just keep the bag sealed. If the fish are swimming in there, I mean, the number one thing to look at is how is the organism in the bag? Are the fish swimming? The water's clear. The corals, when corals get stressed, they'll produce a lot of mucus. So is there a lot of mucus on the corals? Is the water cloudy? Those are indicators that life in the bag is not good. And I just know from experience the organism would be much better getting it out of that nasty bag water into clean new water. And whatever you might be concerned about, temperature, salinity, things like that, most fish can tolerate much bigger changes than we think in those parameters. They would just like to get out of that bag in that nasty water. It'll give them a much better chance of survival. And, we're not always talking about, are they acute toxicity, are going to die right now? But in that bag, if the water's gone nasty, the fish are stressed. Think about, if you were in a sealed room and someone the air in the room wasn't being exchanged, and the CO2 and the carbon monoxide's building up, you're becoming more and more stressed, which leaves you, even when you get out of the room, it's more susceptible to a secondary disease, getting sick a day or two later because you were in such bad environment. And that's where something like the first defense can help. We always recommend adding that to the whatever vessel the organism's going into afterwards. It helps stimulate the immune system. The vitamins help stimulate the immune system and fight off infection and things like that. So that assists the fish. But it would be interesting to have a debate with someone who would, if I could find someone who would say, keep the fish in that nasty bag water. I don't see a point. So,
I don't know that you're going to find anybody. Hopefully you wouldn't find anybody like that.
Yeah. But some people really believe in the drip acclimation, and you'll see that all over, where they'll add, sometimes they'll pour the fish out of the bag, but in that nasty bag water into a bucket, and they'll immediately add 50% new water. And then they'll start drip acclimating, but you still have that nasty bag water, which is full of ammonia, depending on where the fish came from. And I just don't believe that's the correct way to do things from the fish's health point. Get it out of that ammonia water.
Okay, now I've got two questions for you. So one, are there some species of fish that just like acclimating in any sort of change just is way too stressful for them? Like wrasses, for some reason, just come to mind as a species that don't do what, like, I'm trying to think. There's some species of wrasse that they really just don't do well with acclimating, to the point like people have recommended you make sure you turn the light off if you've got any light, make sure it's like a red light, and let them sit in the box for a while before you open the box, and then just super gentle. I feel like drip acclimation was part of their process, but it sounds like maybe that was causing more stress to them along the way. Do you know of any species that fall outside of this method?
Well, we've literally gotten on the freshwater side, immediately comes to mind as Rummynose Tetras and neon tetras. I mean, we've literally gotten fish shipped up from LA to the lab. So they were bagged that morning, a few hours in the truck, come up to the lab, open the bag, pour the fish through the net, put them in the tank, and they all just turn upside down. And it's those species can be very hard. And I couldn't tell you why. I mean, the water, I know the water where they are. I know our water, it's all good. It's hard, chlorine free. But what you did say, when you're acclimating fish, definitely have the lights off. I mean, they're light sensitive, the bright lights, they want to, it's just stress points. You're just trying to eliminate stresses. And fish generally don't live in that bright light like, you see in the detective movies where they're shining the light in your eye, make me talk, or something like that. The fish don't live in that type of super bright environment. It stresses them. So definitely turn the lights down or off. Tank mates, some fish, when they get in the tank, they're disoriented. They want a safe place to hide. But if there's other active fish in there, they see potential meal that isn't really in its right state right now, that's a little disoriented, and that's a time when they can attack. So depending on what the tank mates are, they're definitely on the saltwater side, the what are the called the oh shoot, my mind just went blank. The basslets, I seem to have more problem with smaller fish than larger fish, but there's definitely some fish on the Australian rainbows during the wintertime. Now that's a fish that doesn't really like cold water. So when you see them, we've had this where they've come in and they're kind of on their side in the bag, and that you don't look good. Don't give up on the fish. Just change water, get it to warmer, clean water, and add some like First Defense and usually an aeration. You're trying to get what's ever in their system, because whether it's CO2 or ammonia, you want it to off gas out of the fish into that. It'll go from the high environment of the fish to the low environment of the new water, and provide good aeration, water flow, and clean water. And in most cases, your fish will do well. One fish, powder blue tangs, tend to break down. And this is why the acclimation is just the first part. You can tell after you've kept fish for a while when a fish is going to be what's called break, which just means come down with the disease. If a fish has got clamped fins and is up near the surface and it's just kind of shimming, just in the water, that's a pretty good sign that the fish is stressed. And I would start a disease treatment regime immediately with that fish. If you can catch it without too much work, put it in a quarantine. Well, it should be in a quarantine tank anyways, but in a hospital tank where you can treat it, you want to start that before you start seeing any type of disease organisms, or up to bacteria or spots or something like that. It's just kind of an early sign that the fish aren't doing well. If they're just hovering in one place with their fins clamped close to their body, that's a pretty telltale sign that they're not doing well. Eels.
Oh yeah, and that's one of the things that I've talked. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I'll say one of the things that I've talked about before is like you should, and I think we've even talked about this on the podcast, is like to observe the fish and spend some time like paying attention. Like you've got your fish in your tank, what normal behavior looks like. So if you see a fish acting like that, like, oh, there's something wrong, definitely, hop on that and, do something to treat it.
Right.
And try and reduce its stress.
Yeah. When we get fish in, and we used to do Greenland, we'd ship fish from the lab to the different shows, and you'd get 80-90 bags of fish. You open the box and you take a quick look of, it's kind of looking at all the bags. Okay, is there a bag that's open? Is there a fish? Because things happen. Is there a fish that's not looking too well? Treat that one first. Get it out of that water into new water as soon as you can. trying to think of extreme. Most corals do better in shipping than fish. Shrimp, you would treat them like a fish, and be very careful, because sometimes I've had, oh yeah, there, I ordered 4 shrimp and they came in and there were 8. Well, no, the shrimp molted. When they get stressed, they'll molt, which just grow. They'll shed their ectoskeleton. So, be careful. Don't think that everything's dead in the tank. Observe the bag closely and get all the organisms out of there and get them in new water, and then take a look. A lot of times, going through a lot of bags, you wear one of those little miner headlights, on your forehead. That way you've got your hands free, but you can be looking with a light real close at the corals or at the shrimp or whatever, especially these small organisms, to see how they're doing. But observing is key to the whole thing.
Yep. And, I want to touch on something that you said a minute ago about like the environment that they're going into. Hopefully you've got a quarantine tank, but, you talk about like fish going after other fish. So I had clownfish that had gone through quarantine. I put them in my main display with my cowfish. You think cowfish are slow and awkward and can't swim? Nope. One of the clownfish lost a chunk out of its dorsal fin because the cowfish caught it. I was like, oh goodness. So one of the things that I like to do if I'm adding new fish to an existing tank that has fish, I'd like to, 1, obviously keep the lights off, but 2, maybe give my existing fish in the tank like a snack and a meal before I add the new fish. So hopefully they're less likely to go after the new species that I'm putting in, thinking that they're a snack.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Divert their attention with food, and that gives the new fish a chance to, orient. Okay, I'm in the water. I'm here. I can swim. I can find a hiding spot. And things like that. That's a good point, Hilary.
Yeah, we all want new fish to be successful in our tanks. So every little step that we can take, might as well.
Yeah. And, definitely should be putting them in a quarantine tank to observe them. But as we've stressed many times, the key to successful acclimation is observing the fish, having good, clean, aerated water available. And as I said, in my opinion, it's backed by lots of experience. It's better in almost all cases, to get the fish out of that bag into the new clean water, and never put any of that nasty bag water in your system.
Nope. Good advice.
Yeah. And also, depending on the source, some places add antibiotics or some types of medication to that bag water too. The idea being to reduce or retard the growth of bacteria in the water, because that's what's producing, breaking down the organics. And as I said, the bacteria could be consuming organics and producing ammonia. So if you add some antibiotics or certain medications to that, you can slow that process. And you don't want any of that in your hospital tank. Or if you're going right into the display tank, you don't want it there either.
No, definitely not.
So I think that pretty much covers the acclimation.
Yeah, I think so. I think this is good. Like, we explained why. And if you want more detail on like ammonia and toxicity and stuff like that, check out our previous podcast. We have a ton more detail in that. We go actually into a good bit of depth on that. But yeah, I think this did a good job covering it. And if you're looking for a way how you should acclimate your fish, this is how you should acclimate your fish. We've got the science, the chemistry behind it.
And as always, if you have questions, we always do question and answer. So you can contact us via social media or info at Dr. Tim's Aquatics. And if you've got a question about acclimation or anything else related to fish keeping, coral keeping, and the hobby and things like that, please submit your question and we'll cover it in another episode. But if we've left something out, about acclimating, please contact us and we'll cover it.
Yep, absolutely. And if you're at any of the shows, because I don't think we're going to record another podcast before any of the shows, come see us, come say hi. I think we have swag at all of our booths at all of the shows. So come by, grab some stuff, say hello, take a photo, tag us on social media. I'd love that.
Yep. Always nice seeing people get out. We're loose again, traveling the country.
Woohoo.
Yes. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. This has been Dr. Tim and Hilary with another Dr. Tim's Aquatics podcast. Again, thank you very much.